Chasing Lincoln's Killer, Chapter 10. On Thursday, April 20th, Thomas Jones witnessed the cavalry riding out of town on the news that the assassins had been spotted in another county. Jones concealed his excitement as the soldiers rode away. Once safely out of view of the village, he wasted no time in getting back to the thicket. He emitted the three-note whistle. Harold appeared and led Jones to Booth. This late-night visit from Jones could only mean one thing. It was now or never. They had waited in the pine thicket for 4 nights. This was the night they would attempt to cross the Potomac River to Sanctuary in Virginia on the other side. The three made their way down a series of hidden paths and public roads, Booth riding, the others on foot. Their first destination was Jones's farm. Jones slipped into the house and without a word scooped from the supper table enough food for the 2 men to carry out of the house. The fugitives ate and then immediately headed for the river. Oh, it was about a mile away. They would use a fishing boat Jones had arranged for his servant to leave by the river. Jones waded into the shallows and brought in the boat. He and Harold helped Booth struggle into the craft, laying the weapons and crutches on the hull of the boat. They handed him an oar to steer with. Harold settled in the bow seat to row. Jones crouched down, took a candle from his coat pocket, and told Booth to take out his compass. Jones held the dripping candle over the protective glass cover that shielded the dancing compass needle, showing Booth the course to steer. Jones handed Booth the candle, cautioning him to hide its faint glow during the crossing, lest they be spotted by passing patrol boats. Then Jones gave Booth the name of the contact on the other side. Jones grabbed the stern of the boat and shoved it off. A grateful Booth thrust a fistful of Union greenbacks at Jones. Jones refused the gesture, saying that he had not helped him for money. Under protest, he agreed to accept just $18, the price he had paid for the boat. Jones shoved them off. Harold gripped the oars and rowed toward the Virginia shore, 2 miles away. The river was dark as ink. The boat soon vanished against the smooth glass black surface of the strong current under a moonless night. Thomas Jones never saw Booth, Harold, or his boat again. He made his way back to the farm along deserted roads. One clever man had just outwitted the manhunters. While a frustrated nation sought vengeance, Jones had sheltered and nourished the most hated man in America. They should be landing in Virginia about now, thought Jones. But while Jones slept peacefully, John Wilkes Booth and David Harold were rowing in the wrong direction. Also, on April 20th, Dr. Mudd was questioned again by the cavalry. Mudd feared the authorities would discover some of his secrets very soon. He thought it might go better for him if he volunteered at least part of the truth. He told Lieutenant Lovett that the man with the broken leg was armed, that he wore a false beard. Most interesting of all, he revealed to one of the manhunters that he knew John Wilkes Booth. He had met him last fall. In Bryantown, Colonel Wells found it odd that Mudd had failed to recognize a man he had met before, and not just briefly, especially when that man was so famous. After all, Mudd and Booth had met on several occasions, in broad daylight, and Booth had slept at Mudd's farm in the past. After hours of questioning, Colonel Wells showed Mudd another photograph of Lincoln's killer and asked whether he recognized the man in the picture as the stranger. On second thought, Mudd admitted, he realized it just now. That stranger was John Wilkes Booth. Unintentionally or unknowingly, Mudd claimed, he had helped him escape. Exhausted by questioning, after agreeing to return to Bryantown the next day to sign a statement, Mudd rode home. In a few hours, Booth and Harold would reach Virginia, far from the reach of Colonel Wells, his detectives, and Lieutenant Dana, and the cavalry. Mudd's lies delayed the cavalry's departure long enough to allow the fugitives to escape Maryland. Thomas Jones would eventually be questioned by Union detectives. They suspected that a man of his reputation must know something of Booth's escape. They arrested him and eventually imprisoned him. But with no eyewitnesses who could place him with Booth, and him not volunteering anything, he was eventually released, as was Captain Cox. Decades later, when his confession could no longer hurt Booth, Thomas Jones did tell his story to a journalist who recorded it for history. Harold dipped the blades of the oars deep and pulled hard. After spending so much time in the pine thicket, a lost week, it felt good to be on the move again. Booth checked the compass bearings. They were supposed to be rowing from Maryland west across the Potomac to Virginia, then south. But the needle on the compass indicated they were headed north. Was the compass broken? No, the compass was true. Harold was a good enough navigator during the daylight, but not under cloak of darkness, and not haunted by the fear of capture. He had been rowing for far too long. They should be in Virginia by now. His palms and fingers were sore, and his burning arms and leg muscles made it clear they had already traveled too far. They had to land soon. Harold spotted a familiar-looking landmark, Blossom Point, at the mouth of the creek that ran north. The good news was that he knew the area and had friends who would help them. The bad news was that they were back in Maryland, and they were farther north than they had been the night before. That left them vulnerable once more to Union patrols that were pursuing them. They landed the boat at the mouth of the creek in Maryland early in the morning, Friday, April 21st. Booth and Harold gathered their weapons and blankets and headed on foot to the nearby house of a friend of Harold's, where they were fed and given information. Union troops and detectives were swarming the countryside, motivated in part by the enormous reward being offered by the War Department. The geography of the place they landed made it impossible for them to escape except by crossing the Potomac. Harold and Booth would have to hide in the low-lying wetlands and wait to cross. At this critical moment, when they needed to escape Maryland as quickly as possible, they did something unexplainable. They did nothing. They did not retrieve the boat and row across the river. They sat in the dark and did nothing. They would have to spend another day in hiding in Maryland until the following evening, when darkness came. While Booth and Harold tarried, the government pursued them with new energy. The evidence gathered at Mudd's farm, plus alleged sightings of the fugitives southwest of his farm, suggested that the assassins were making for Virginia. They knew Booth was lame on crutches. They knew he had shaven off his mustache. Horse-mounted couriers and telegraph wires were alive all day with instructions to troops to enlist the help of fishermen and others on the river to capture the fugitives.